All right, guys, welcome to Uncontrolled Opposition Live here Thursday on Pasta to Go. I want to remind everybody that this is a WBAI show. You're going to be able to see and listen to the professor, Jayme Kuzmarov, and his sidekick, Gloria Guillo, as they go in and dive into different interesting topics, interviews from different peoples across the political spectrum. You know the work they do. They are the uncontrolled opposition, which is great in a sea of controlled opposition players out there. I just want to thank you all. I am Craig Pasta Jardula. You could watch the show live every Thursday, and I believe it's aired on Tuesday, and you can listen to it there on WBAI. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in the players here today. First off, Gloria Guillo is with us. How you doing, Gloria?
Hey, Pasta.
It's great to hear and see you. And let's also bring in the professor. Jayme, I miss doing the show with you, but I think you and Gloria do an amazing job, and I'm glad you guys have kept the torch running, as they say there in the Olympics.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's bring in our guest real quick, or do we bring that in after or while you're announcing her?
Yeah, you could bring in our guest. That'd be wonderful.
Who is our guest, Gloria?
Our guest today is Judi Rever.
All right.
Judi, did I get that right?
You did. Thanks.
All right, good.
So I'm going to step aside. I'm going to be in the wings. I'm filling in for Jayme CheeseSlice. I want to send some love out to him. I'm going to let you kids get at it. And Gloria, you could take it.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Uncontrolled Opposition, where together we battle mind wars with truth strikes. I'm Gloria Guillo, an investigative journalist, and I'm here with my co-host, Professor Jayme Kuzmarov, managing editor of Covert Action magazine. Our producer and engineer is Jayme CheeseSlice. Today, we have our executive producer, Craig Pasta Jardula, helping us out. The opinions you hear are ours and that of our guest, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. This content is intended for informational and educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as professional or legal advice. Listeners are encouraged to form their own opinions. Today, we are joined by Canadian journalist and author Judi Rever. We will discuss her book titled Rwanda's 30-Year Assault on Congo, The Crimes and Criminals and the Cover-Up, and her book, In Praise of Blood, The Crimes of the Rwandan Patriotic Front. The predator class keeps pushing a sanitized Western narrative about... I'm having trouble here. Starting over. The predator class keeps pushing a sanitized Western narrative about Rwanda as a miracle of stability and growth under Paul Kagame. But our guest today, Judi Rever, cuts through the official story in her powerful books. Judi re-examines the dynamic of the Rwandan genocide and chronicles 3 decades of mass violence committed by Kagame's army, often with the backing of U.S. tax dollars. Her research is a narrative synthesis of hundreds of interviews with survivors and Kagame's former soldiers, bolstered by leaked documents from the UN tribunal. It reveals a pattern of calculated brutality that the mainstream accounts prefer to bury. Rwanda sits at the heart of Central Africa's Great Lakes region, strategically placed for influence over neighboring territories rich in resources. It offers a pool of disciplined labor and serves as a key node for minerals like coltan, tin, tantalum, and feeds global supply chains for electronics and high-tech industries. Before the mid-1990s, Rwanda's mineral exports were modest, in the low millions. But after Kagame's consolidated power, the sector exploded. 3T mineral exports, tin, tantalum, and tungsten reached over 150 million by 2011 and climbed higher in following years, with total mineral export revenues surging from around 373 million in 2017 to 1.75 billion in 2024. That kind of growth doesn't happen in a vacuum. It ties directly into control of labor, land, and cross-border flows. This is why the full record matters. The U.S. and its allies didn't just turn a blind eye. They elevated and protected a proxy useful for regional dominance. Judi's work forces us to confront what that support has cost in human terms, beyond the convenient tales of heroes and villains. Thank you. Judi, please tell us how you became involved in Rwanda and then a bit about its history and your findings.
Thanks, Gloria, for that excellent introduction. How I got into this, it was a long time ago, 30 years to be precise. As a young journalist, I was working in France at the time for Radio France International. Africa had not been part of my mental landscape at the time, but I was sent to cover the humanitarian crisis in Congo within days of Paul Kagame's overthrow of Mobutu Sese Seko. And to be honest, I had been following, chronicling, and documenting Paul Kagame's invasion, Rwanda's invasion of Zaire from 1996 onward from Paris, and documenting those, quite frankly, the slaughter of Rwandan Hutu refugees. Paul Kagame, as head of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, the acronym is RPF, had seized power in 1994 during the ashes of the 1994 genocide. And he is an ethnic Tutsi. His army are full of and led by ethnic Tutsis. And during the cataclysm of violence in 1994, where his army committed extensive atrocities, a lot of the other ethnic group that is blamed for the genocide in the official narrative, and there was a genocide committed by Hutus against Tutsis, but my research provides the full story. And so a lot of the Hutus, the opposing or the other ethnic group, fled to neighboring countries. Most of them, great number, more than 1 million, fled to Zaire, Congo, and established themselves in camps. And so Kagame and his commanders used that as a pretext, saying these Rwandan Hutus in the camps are a security threat to Rwanda after the genocide. So, the army needs to invade, the Tutsi army needs to invade, bust up these camps. And what Kagame's army really wanted to do is eliminate as many Hutus, Rwandan Hutu refugees in Congo as possible, and essentially continue a military campaign across Zaire, a huge country in Central Africa, the size of Western Europe, and then overflow Mobutu Sese Seko. And so I covered that whole mess, and I was on the ground in 1997 within days of the toppling of Mobutu.
And since that time, you've interviewed, I guess, many different, many RPF defectors, which was striking from reading your book. How many were pretty open, I guess, about describing some of the horrible things that went on. So, how did you come to interview so many of those RPF defectors, and could you say what it was like interviewing them?
Well, it was extraordinary. As Gloria pointed out, there are 3 layers of evidence that I have collected over the years. The first layer, as a young journalist starting out, were the victims of Kagame's regime, and that those first victims I interviewed were in Congo. And then over the years, I interviewed many, many Hutu victims from Rwanda. And around 2011, 2012, I started interviewing Tutsi military insiders, soldiers and officers who had broken with Kagame's regime. And so it added a very detailed layer to my research. And then, of course, I got access to a lot of leaked documents from the United Nations tribunal that was set up to try criminals responsible for the violence in 1994. Those interviews with Tutsi soldiers and officers completely changed my research. It validated what the Hutu victims had said, but it provided much richer detail. And a lot of these Tutsi former military, former RPF military, were living in Rwanda, had been living in Rwanda, but had fled to Uganda principally. And also some of them had gotten asylum afterwards in places like Canada, the United States, a lot of them in Europe. And so I interviewed those people. I went to see them directly. I interviewed many dozens of them, and they provided me with incredible testimony of the crimes that their army, intelligence, and regular army committed against Hutus during the genocide, but also before the genocide in a scorched earth campaign that lasted more than 3.5 years prior to the genocide. And they also gave me testimony.
And is that referring in 1991, 92, when the RPF invaded from Uganda? Yeah, because a lot of people don't know that the war was triggered by an invasion of the RPF in exile after Kagame formed it. And from my understanding, Kagame may have been behind the murder of Fred Rwigema, who had been the previous leader. Is that your understanding?
Well, that's what a lot of the senior ex-RPF officials and commanders have told me, that he was behind the assassination of Fred Rwigema. But
he was more moderate, I guess. He was more into conciliating and developing a power sharing, where Kagame wanted to control Rwanda and ultimately, I think, the whole region.
Yes, I mean, I think the strategy was different, and it looked as though Kagame was much more of an imperialist agent of the United States very early on. And so the tactics of the military invasion from 1990 onward, 91, 92, 93, the tactics and the brutality became worse as the years wore on. And of course, Jayme, you've also examined a lot of these issues. You followed them, and your knowledge is detailed as well about Rwanda. But most of the clearest evidence for the shooting down of the plane carrying Rwanda's Hutu president and Burundi's Hutu president, which is the act that unleashed the Rwanda genocide. Most of the evidence shows that the RPF was behind that as well. So there was extensive, there were many crimes that Kagame's army had been responsible for leading up to the ethnic killings that started right after the Hutu president, Juvenal Habyarimana's plane was shot down.
Mm-hmm.
Jayme, could you talk a little bit about Kagame's education in the United States?
Sure. Well, Judy's more of an expert than me. She could add, from what I understand, is that he was sent for training. Well, my understanding is that Roger Winter worked undercover for refugee relief agencies and was a CIA liaison with the Tutsi community in exile. Because my study of U.S. foreign policy in the region, I found that, because the Hutu, when Rwanda gained its independence from Belgium, we should go back then, there was the Hutu power revolution, because the Belgians had relied on the Tutsi, and the Tutsi treated the Hutu like slaves and had this superior mentality, mentality of superiority over them. And then when independence came, the Hutu kind of reclaimed power. And I think the U.S. was hedging its bets because they always saw the strategic importance and the mineral wealth. And in the 60s is when the U.S. and CIA had empowered Mobutu, helped put him in there. There was Maurice Templesman was this diamond merchant who had great influence in the Democratic Party and was tied with the CIA. And his company made millions of dollars in the Congo, and he was close with Mobutu and helped engineer his rise to power. And then in Rwanda, I found evidence that the CIA actually aligned with with Habyarimana. The first leader of Rwanda was Gregoire Kayibanda, and then his successor was Juvenal Habyarimana. Came in the early 70s, I believe, and he had actually been a police general. And I found, because I did a study of American police training in the Cold War, and I was looking at the records on Africa and Rwanda, and there was evidence that the CIA was training Habyarimana, and the intelligence reports referred to Tutsi in that time as terrorists, and that they were allied with communist China, because a lot of the Tutsi had fled into exile when the Hutu power revolution was consummated. The Tutsi, who had been dominant and allied with the Belgian colonizers, a lot of them had to flee to neighboring country like Uganda. And that's where Kagame marshaled his forces in Uganda to try and retake the country. And gradually, what I found in my research was that the U.S. soured on the Hutu Habyarimana. They felt that because he moved more toward the socialist camp over time, and there were complaints. I did research a lot of different presidential libraries, including the Reagan Library in the 80s. They were complaining about him, that it was too state. He had this huge state bureaucracy, and it was more a socialist economy. And I think he was, leaning more to China or the Soviet Union, and by that point they had lost favor with him. And I think France supported him more. So the U.S. in the 80s shifted to, whereas they had characterized the Tutsi exiles, they thought they were left-leaning or allied with communist China in the 70s. They shifted, and so that's when I think Roger Winter was sent as a liaison to cultivate support, and that's when I think they started arming them in Uganda. And there's evidence that in the late 80s, U.S. military aid to Uganda, and right before the invasion of 91, there was a huge increase in U.S. military support to Uganda, which was taken over by Yoweri Museveni. In 1986, Museveni took over Uganda. There had been a socialist leader, Obote, and the U.S. supported ultimately Museveni and poured in huge military support in the late 80s, early 90s, which was actually intended to go to the RPF, because Museveni and Kagame were close, and Kagame had served in the intelligence services and the Bush army of Museveni when he was fighting guerrilla war. And from my understanding, Kagame developed a reputation early on for brutality, of torturing people, and was known as a sadist. And the Rwandans I know, who were somewhat supportive of RPF because they had grown up in exile in Uganda. This was a student at Harvard. When I was a graduate student at Brandeis, my roommate was a student at Harvard who had grown up in exile, but he liked Fred Rwigema, and he was still very upset by his death.
Well, what I really wanted you to get to, Jeremy, was that in your article, you talk about Kagame was trained in psychological warfare
Yeah, well, I was
methods
getting to that.
at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas.
Yeah, correct. And then so the Winter and the CIA started arming the Tutsi through the RPF through Uganda to plan for this takeover. I think they planned it because Habyarimana was on the outs and was more allied with France and the Eastern Bloc. So they wanted to use and with Mobutu aging and they knew that there was going to be instability in the Congo. I think they had this plan for years to use the RPF and to cultivate Kagame as a proxy to dominate the region for U.S. interests, and so U.S. corporations could exploit the mining wealth in the Congo. The key really is the Congo, because Rwanda doesn't have as much mineral resources. It's Congo the big prize. So I think their plan was to help install Kagame in Rwanda and use him to open up the Congo and install friendly leaders in the Congo, like he did, because he invaded Congo numerous times. So that's when they brought him for training in psychology, and that I think has relevance to the Rwandan genocide and how it's been, the deception, because Kagame was trained in psychological warfare tactics at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. What we've seen is a huge psychological warfare operation designed to present Kagame, this hero who saved his country from a genocide and engineered this economic miracle. And that's all propaganda. And he's a specialist in using psychological warfare techniques. And that includes, Phoenix-style program-style operation where you carry out atrocities but blame your enemy. And I think to make them look bad. And I think a lot of the atrocities that went on in the Rwandan genocide and after, as Judi describing, the public was led to believe they were carried out by the Hutu, but in fact they were carried out by the RPF, but the Hutu were blamed for it. And I think that was part of the psychological warfare, and Kagame is a master at that. He's worked, there's a lot of evidence as far as the amount of support he's got over the years. From the early phase, he was getting a lot of military support from the CIA and other U.S. Pentagon. I mean, they were there from the beginning, I think, to assist his invasion in 91. And then even in 94, there were I think it's a myth. I wrote about this in my book on Bill Clinton in the chapter on Central Africa, that it's a myth of U.S. non-intervention. This narrative took hold that the U.S. stood by, but I present evidence from different sources that the U.S. was there from the beginning to support the RPF takeover of Rwanda, and there were U.S. troops there, and there was all kinds of military support to Kagame and the RPF through all those years. And then when he invaded Congo, they had more support, and the CIA was providing satellite communication, all kinds of intelligence support. There were U.S. special forces were there, a lot of mercenary. The U.S. operated clandestinely and used military contractors, so there wasn't direct combat troops, but they were mercenaries affiliated with U.S. military contractors there assisting Kagame as he invaded the Congo and overthrew several governments to install leader that would serve U.S. and Rwandan interests, including Joseph Kabila, whose real name many believe is Hippolyte Kanambe, and is actually a Rwandan, and ruled the country more in the interests of Rwanda and allowed their plunder their minerals.
Just to kind of make this a little simple, this is not my area of expertise. I'm more focused on Latin America, so I had to really get up to speed on this. And I asked Jayme this really kind of simple question as I'm reading all this material, because it is confusing. And I asked him this simple question: Tutsis killed Tutsis, but blamed Hutu. I mean, it almost boggles the mind. This is seems like a classic psychological operation with false flags and false enemies and things like that. So then you look at the root. Well, where does this come from? Who's propping this person up? Where was this person trained? And then you start seeing the CIA roots. So there was a paragraph that Jayme wrote that I thought really helped me. And it's basically, while Hutu extremists killed many innocent Tutsi, I'll try this one more time. While Hutu extremists killed many innocent Tutsi who had been mistreated historically, the key perpetrators of the mass killings were the Tutsi-led Rwandan Patriotic Front, led by Paul Kagame. And that really kind of helped me focus better on that. Thank you. I'll let you guys continue.
My research challenges the, as Jeremy and Gloria, you pointed out, the official narrative. But what my research says is that the violence was bidirectional. So we did have Hutu militia and elements of the Hutu state, often local, organized in targeting Tutsi, and they were responsible and very much engaged in that genocide. Now, the court that was set up to prosecute crimes did not prove conspiracy, so that it could not prove that the Hutu regime had planned a genocide years in advance. So setting that aside, but my research shows very clearly with extensive evidence that the Tutsi army committed genocide against Hutus as well. And that has been covered up. I also am able to show, and I've done this with documents that were leaked to me and through rigorous testimony I've collected from Tutsi military, that Tutsi commandos, so this is to Jeremy's point, Tutsi commandos from Paul Kagame's army were trained in infiltration techniques, getting back to the psychological operations that Kagame and his colleagues received at Fort Leavenworth. But they infiltrated Hutu militias and directly participated in the killing of Tutsis. Okay, so they potentiated the Tutsi genocide, and that was a tactic. These were it was a tactic along false flags, of course, but it was something completely different. This was a tactic to increase the number of Tutsi victims and demonize Hutus and the former regime to establish a moral legitimacy, okay, on the international stage. So they are, not only did Kagame and his colleagues unleash the genocide by assassinating the Hutu president, shooting down the plane, but they engaged in direct killing of Tutsis in many cases, not only in Kigali, but all over the country, because I'm able to show in my research that they infiltrated in clandestine ways all over the country before April 6th, before the violence began. And at the same time, they were secretly and massively killing Hutu civilians in order to reduce the population, but also wipe out, remove Hutus from political and military power. So they targeted not only Hutu military, but Hutu businessmen, Hutu intellectuals, community leaders, because once the cultural and military and economic leadership of Hutu community was gone, then the Rwanda Patriotic Front, the RPF, could rule without resistance. And they had already established a moral legitimacy because all of these Tutsis were dying at the hands of RPF commandos and also Hutu militia and some local Hutu politicians. So they were in good stead very, very early on. And I have to mention Roger Winter because you brought him up. Yes, he was a spook for the CIA, working for ostensibly USAID, but he had been stumping for the Rwandan Patriotic Front in the late 80s. So trying to gather money for the Tutsis in exile, principally in Rwanda, for the refugee community and for RPF founders. And he had been at this because he's passed away now for a long time. I want to mention a couple things. One thing that I did not mention in my first book, but Roger Winter was at Mulindi, inside Rwanda, in northern Rwanda, near the Ugandan border, okay, because the RPF invaded from the north, from Uganda, from its military bases in Uganda. They had been provided with a lot of logistics and weapons and money that had been supplied by the United States, of course, and the Ugandan military. Roger Winter was in Mulindi, which was the RPF headquarters in northern Rwanda, just a couple days before the shooting down of the plane, the act that triggered the genocide. So here we have a CIA agent, ostensibly USAID official, hanging out at RPF's military headquarters within a day or two of a huge operation, intelligence operation, where the RPF had already brought missiles from Mulindi into the capital, and they used those missiles to shoot down the Hutu presidential plane. So he was evidently involved in the planning and the military operation in some way. He was also on the front line in Zaire in the fall of '96, just as Kagame launched his invasion of Zaire, Congo. Here we have Roger Winter negotiating in Goma and running interference. And so he was part of the military ops and also the propaganda. One more thing I could say about Roger Winter is when the Rwandan Patriotic Front and its special forces behind its military battalions, when they were conducting a slaughter campaign against Hutu civilians in the east of Rwanda, near the border of Tanzania. And this was immediately after the plane was shot down. So this was in April, May, June, etc. So when Kagame's troops were massively killing Hutu civilians and dumping their bodies into the Kagera River in eastern Rwanda, and a lot of those bodies ended up in Lake Victoria in Uganda. But Roger Winter went on mainstream television in the United States, and like a lot of other people, but he established, he was very, very important in establishing the official narrative for the RPF of the genocide. He declared that these were victims, those victims in the river, the bodies, and some of the bodies were, mangled and decapitated, and it was atrocious. And these victims came to symbolize the brutality and the horror of the Rwandan genocide. And those victims, most of them were Hutus who had been killed in that zone by the RPF. They were not Tutsis. And those images were used as propaganda. And I'm not stating that, Tutsis weren't killed in other areas of the country, but most of the victims that were dumped into the Kagera River in the east, and that we saw in May and June on national television, and that were splattered across mainstream newspapers in North America and Europe, those victims were Hutu victims of Kagame's army.
We were flashing, just for our visual audience, we were flashing some maps of Uganda, of the region, and just to show the placement of Rwanda and how pivotal it is.
Well, it is. And so you have a very small country. It's a landlocked country. We mentioned Uganda to the north, Tanzania, to the east, Burundi to the south, but it is bordered to one of the richest, probably the richest in resource country in Africa, and that's Congo. And the estimated wealth of Congo adjacent to Rwanda is upwards of $24 trillion in natural resources. And so that includes, as Gloria, you mentioned in your introduction, vast amount of mineral wealth. So namely, and I discussed this in my latest book on the crimes, the 3 decades of crimes in Congo, copper and cobalt, okay? These two industrialized minerals are essential for the functioning of our global economy. Okay, the 3 T minerals you mentioned, tantalum, tungsten, tin, in addition to gold, are also essential. They're not industrialized in terms of the mining, but they're also essential for big tech and the weapons industry. Okay,
they're also a tongue twister. I'm really impressed how it rolls off your tongue. I'm envious.
Oh, it's just because I've been doing this for a while, but there is no way that our global economy and the global supply chain could function without the minerals that are coming out of Congo. Okay, and so Kagame was essential in opening up the economic corridor. That was his utility. But if we go back, and Jayme mentioned the 1980s, it's crucial to understand. And this is what I point out in my latest book on Congo. Mobutu had been a Cold War stooge for the United States and Belgium. He had come to power because the United States and Belgium had, in the aftermath of the organized assassination of the first democratically elected leader of Congo, which was Patrice Lumumba. So the United States and Belgium put Mobutu in power, used him as a Cold War stooge. But by the 1980s, because this is a crucial time, the copper and cobalt that the Americans wanted to continue to come out of Congo, of Zaire, had plummeted, okay? And so the multinationals could not get those minerals out for the global economy, and everything was in disarray. Mobutu was a kleptocratic ruler, and he was no longer useful. And so basically what the West, in particular the United States, wanted is to open up Zaire, Congo for business. And so it is, I have tracked, and that's what happened, because I've tracked the plummeting levels of copper and Congo from the late 1980s and 90s. And then after Mobutu was overthrown and basically a Rwandan U.S. proxy was put in power in 96, 97, and the levels of copper and cobalt in particular have skyrocketed since then. And there were a lot of American multinational interests that went in. Then the Chinese actually moved in. But those levels of those two have continued to rise. And that's been a very principal objective. And also the tantalum, tungsten, and tin. And those are the strategic minerals in addition to gold. And tantalum is only really found in terms of the amount produced in Congo. This is a highly resistant metal that is essential for rockets, defense systems, all the electronics we use, aeronautics, everything. And so there are vast quantities. Congo is the biggest producer of it. Rwanda, because of the volcanic and the rock formations, produces very little. But Rwanda has exported more tantalum derived from coltan than any other country. So there are other countries that produce some tantalum, but not in the quantities that Congo produces. And so therein lies the interest for the United States. But the issue of Congolese tantalum is that the system that was set up by Kagame, the fact that Congo has not been sovereign all these years has ensured that the price of tantalum, which we need for our economy, it remains cheap. So there's a cheap, steady supply of this mineral in particular that is only available in the vast quantities that we need in Congo. And so Kagame, because of the system he set up of plunder, illicit trafficking, and government chaos and occupation, especially in the Kivu provinces, has ensured this economic exploitation. And so our consumption of these minerals and in our use of them in big tech and all the technology is part of the problem as well.
Can you talk a little bit about the conditions the miners have to endure so that these profits are maximized to foreign businesses and corporations?
Well, there's a whole very exploitative and militarized economy in the mines and around the mines, okay? And again, if we're dealing with tantalum only, there's a place called Rubaya, which is essentially ground zero for the extraction of coltan. And so the miners they're working in very dangerous conditions in sometimes open pits, but there are, sometimes down through tunnels. Sometimes there are collapses and they're submerged in and lose their lives in very dangerous conditions. They also barely eke out a living. For many millions of people, this is how they feed their families. And so I'm not suggesting at all that there should not be any mining in Eastern Congo. I believe that Congo should, in a sovereign way, exploit and profit from their minerals. But if you look at the profit margins that companies like Apple are making, it's absolutely extraordinary and devastating to me that these miners and there's a whole sort of economy around the mines, and there's a lot of sexual exploitation of women and historically of children who have also worked around the mines, carrying and being carrying a lot of the minerals to what they call comptoirs and getting them ready for transport and export to Rwanda. But there's a whole sort of illicit economy that is extremely exploitative. And if you compare how little they make and how they suffer and toil in these conditions, a lot of it is poisonous as well. And how much the companies like a big tech are making and the shareholders, it really is criminal.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you want to say something about this interview you conducted with Jim Hudek and who he was? And that is a window, I guess, into the cover-up and the CIA's role in the violence, violent invasion that set the groundwork for this economy you're describing.
Well, Robert Hudek.
Oh, Robert, yeah.
Yeah, he was a career diplomat for the United States, and he had been ambassador to Uganda in the 1980s. I mean, you talked about the 1980s. when this started, and he was an ambassador in the mid 1980s when after Yoweri Museveni seized power, and when the United States decided to use Yoweri Museveni and eventually Paul Kagame as linchpins for U.S. Geopolitical interests in Central Africa. So basically, he was an interesting guy, Robert Hudek. He was an assistant, as a young man, he had been an assistant to Kissinger during that whole period when the U.S. was committing war crimes in Cambodia and Vietnam. And so in my book, I show how Robert Hudek was part of the U.S. steered regime change in Congo 30 years ago. And so he opened up the taps of financial funding and military assistance to Uganda, which was then used for Kagame's invasion war in Rwanda, and which eventually allowed Kagame's Rwandan Patriotic Front to overthrow the Habyarimana regime and seize power. And so what I show in particular is Robert Hudek. He was in Zaire, Congo, during the U.S.-led regime change of Congo in 1996 and 97. And he was in a place called Kisangani when I was there, and I didn't meet up with him. Of course, I covered this, as I mentioned, and I was going into the jungle south of Kisangani, and I was on what were called these search and rescue missions with local humanitarian workers to try to find surviving Hutu refugees, Rwandan Hutu refugees who had been attacked by Kagame's forces. And so I was doing a number of these forays into the jungle, and it was very, very difficult terrain. Robert Hudek was stationed. He had moved from Goma, and I believe he was working for the CIA. I've gathered enough evidence. He moved from Goma in the east of Zaire, Congo, to north and a little bit west to a place called Kisangani, where I was. And ostensibly, and he said to me that he was part of USAID, a disaster response team. And he was there, he said, to help the repatriation, he told me, of Hutu refugees from the jungle back to Rwanda. And he was part of, he said, humanitarian efforts to separate, as he described it, the armed elements of the Hutu refugees from the civilian and bring them back to Rwanda. Well, he did nothing of the sort, because I kept probing him when I called him at his home earlier this year. And actually last year I called him, and he was rather gobsmacked when I asked him these questions, because he couldn't tell me about going to any of the makeshift camps where Hutu refugees had been attacked. And I put to him some very critical questions about the violent campaign of Kagame's troops directed at the Hutu refugees, and he denied that, he basically denied that any violence had occurred and said he had no knowledge of any of the slaughter committed by Kagame's troops. And I said that was impossible, because it was being reported from October, November, December, January, and intensively reported and chronicled by many people, including myself. And so he also denied that he was working for the CIA, even though I have had evidence of him doing that. From not least from a senior U.S. official who was in the region at the time, he said Robert Hudek was working for the CIA and helping to facilitate Kagame's advance as part of this effort military and intelligence effort to conduct regime change. And when I kept asking him about the regime change aspect, he did not deny that. He was invoking for much of our discussion plausible deniability and using those excuses, but he didn't deny that the US had conducted regime change. He did say that he was not sorry that Mobutu was toppled. He felt like many others that Mobutu had to go. So it was a very difficult conversation, but he was like a deer caught in the headlights.
Your research really is actionable. It's bringing truth to light at a time when it's necessary and important. Has there been any blowback to you personally for this type of, really breaking, cutting edge reporting?
Nothing particularly recently, but around 2013, 14, and 15, I was a target by the ruling Rwandan authorities. And it was when I had reached another level with my reporting. I had contacted and infiltrated Tutsi circles and all these people who had broken with the regime, and they were enlightening me with real evidence of what kind of crimes had been committed during the genocide by the Tutsis. And I had basically collected evidence of about Kagame being behind the assassination of Habyarimana. And it was at that time in late 2013 and 14 and 15 that I had serious security issues. My youngest daughter was threatened. I had to
Oh my goodness.
take particular security measures around my home in Montreal. I was contacted by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, and the RCMP and the provincial level of security, Sûreté du Québec, here in our province. So I was in touch with a number of security agencies, and my phone was also connected to a police alert system. So if anyone were to attack my home, then police would be dispatched immediately. I continue to do research despite many of these threats, but
much respect.
The family situation imploded a little bit, and I was traveling a lot to Europe, and during one of my trips to Europe, to Brussels, actually, I arrived, I had set up many interviews during a week-long stay in Brussels, and when I arrived at my hotel, I saw these armored vehicles. I saw 2 armored vehicles in particular, and some other smaller ones outside. And I thought maybe, I didn't know why these people were there at such a small hotel. But when I arrived to check in, I was then approached by people in black suits, and one person introduced himself as the head of the Belgian State Security Protection Force. And they told me they had been mandated by the government to provide me with protection. This was 2014, during my stay in Belgium, because the Rwandan embassy posed a serious level 3 threat to my life. And I was floored, because I thought that for the first time, I thought, okay, this is real. I could lose my life, or, I could be shot or stabbed. A lot of Rwandans who have been whistleblowers have disappeared. And that's been one of the reasons that we don't understand what really happened during the genocide, because some of the early whistleblowers and truth tellers disappeared, were targeted, were silenced or blackmailed, jailed or killed. Okay, there's a whole series of people who were very courageous, but Rwandans have learned over the years that it's deadly. And it's not only people who were inside the country, but certainly people who fled to surrounding countries. They were tracked down and killed. And then what I didn't understand when I was doing this research intensively in the 2013, 14, 15 period is there's such a well-developed system of transnational repression. And Kagame has used his embassies as vectors of places where violence is planned and conspired. So you have political cadres who work in embassies abroad in places like the United States and Canada and European capitals, and they conspire to poison, kill, target, blackmail all kinds of people. And so I didn't really understand that system until I became a victim of it. And so I'm much more privileged and protected than Rwandans are, even abroad. And so I benefited from protection. And then I started to change the way I worked. And I had to, if I was going to finish my book, my first book, and then continue with this, I needed to take more precautionary measures. But it was a very difficult time.
It's really humbling to hear your commitment and what you've been through and how inspiring too on how despite it all you keep fighting and you know, and how much what we do, especially, you know, a journalist like you, just getting the message out is so important, and how terrified this ruling elite, this, you know, cabal of people exploiting others, are afraid of the truth. So Judi, thank you so much for your work, and thank you for being a guest on our show. It's humbling to just be in your presence, and we're so thankful. Can you please tell our audience how they can purchase your 2 books and follow your work?
Thank you, Gloria. My book is available on Amazon. The paper copy of both of my books, in Praise of Blood, and also my latest, Rwanda's 30-year assault on Congo, The Crimes, the Criminals, and the Cover-Up. You can order through Amazon. You can also, if you want to save time, go on the website of my publisher for my latest, Baraka Books. And you can order a PDF or an ebook, and you can get a copy, electronic copy, immediately. My first book is published by Random House Canada. It's a bigger publisher, and the ebook is available quickly as well on Amazon. But thank you for having me. I really appreciate the chance to elaborate on my research and the deceptive schemes, and also the horrible legacy of imperialism that lingers in that area of the world.
Well, that wraps up our show for today. This is Uncontrolled Opposition. I'm Gloria Guillo, joined by Professor Jayme Kuzmarov. Remember to like and share our broadcast. Your kind support keeps us going. And remember, the opinions you hear are ours and that of our guests, not those of WBAI Foundation or the Progressive Radio Network. Please find us on Substack, Twitter X, and Podbeam. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you next week.
Okay, should we log
All right.
off?
I don't know how they're supposed to do that. I'm sure Jayme can edit
all
it
right.
in post.
Yeah, he'll fix it.
We're still live, and I want to say thank you to Judi for coming on the show. That's for sure. I guess this is the overtime period right now. I think this is a really important interview, guys. I love the fact that you're talking about these rare earth minerals. People don't realize. They think they're sometimes. Me and Gloria talk about this. How they're sometimes stuck in 1990, where they think that the quest out there is to go conquer just to grab oil, oil, oil. The long game has always been about the cobalt, these rare earth minerals, and they're rich over there in the
There's
Congo.
also gold in that area too. There's gold in them Dar Hills.
So the plan is, right, bring in the CIA, the government within the government, make sure you destabilize the region as much as possible so then you can extract these resources for pennies on the dollar. It's the old playbook, but it seems to work. And I'm glad that you came on the show today, Judi, to highlight that, because the fourth industrial revolution is real. They're trying to build what's called a control grid. That's track and trace systems everywhere. They want to keep track of what everybody's doing. The greatest threat to the empire is its own citizens. So you got to get ahead of the game. And when you talk about alternative sources of, when people talk about, what's that word they say, Gloria, for the resources? What is it? Well, clean energy, the word they use, renewable source resources. Sometimes that can mean we have to go invade another country to get those resources, and people don't look at the bigger picture. And I'm glad you guys brought that to the table today.
You're welcome.
Thank you for helping out. And we just want to say, we're hoping for Jayme's mom to have a quick recovery. Jayme had an unexpected thing happen and a family matter, and he's taking care of it. And a lot of us here have been taking care of our family members. I don't know about Judi, but like everyone seems to have some parent, maybe it's our age at this point, that's in a crisis, and we're called on to to help them through it. And Jayme steps up, and so does Craig, and and Jeremy too, and we all have stepped up. So
I have a question, and I'm going to start with the professor first because I know he usually has to get out of here. But Professor, and then Judi, I'd like to hear your follow-up. We talked about what has happened in the past, shedding some light on what's really going on. Obviously, a lot of funny business to destabilize this region for the resource extraction. What do you see the immediate and long-term future for the Congo from everything you've seen right now? Because if it's kind of quieted down, you know what I'm saying? I'm old enough to remember the movie Hotel Rwanda. A lot of people, a lot of the young kids, they don't even know where. They couldn't find Congo on a map. That's why I think it's important when Gloria was, put the map up, let's get it up there, because people don't know what's going on. What do you see for the immediate and long-term future of the Congo with all those resources? Because I think Judi said there's trillions of dollars that still exist there.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Judi's book showed that this is ongoing. Unfortunately, what we're discussing here is not in the past. That the Rwandan, they operate through these M23 militias. They've occupied a lot of eastern Congo. They've been active this year. There have been reports of their operation. They continue to brutalize the people of eastern Congo. I think Congo does not have a stable government. I mean, they had for years this guy, Joseph Kabila. I think his real name is Hippolyte Kanambe. And, he was adopted, but he originated from Rwanda. And I think he was basically a proxy of Rwanda and controlling the entire Congo. And he's been immune from any prosecution. He himself committed a lot of crime and his armies. And then, the current leader is, if I'm not mistaken, this guy, Felix Tshisekedi, but I don't think he's a very strong leader. I mean, I think Congo hasn't really had strong leadership since Patrice Lumumba, and that's why they had to take him out back in the 1960. So I think the great game continues. The U.S. is kind of in the back scene, trying to ensure that they have a weak government, that they continue to exploit the country. And, despite all that's come out about Kagame and all the abuses, which you can't deny anymore, but he's still in power and the U.S. is still financing him. So, it's like they don't care. I mean, and, he may be in power until the day he dies. I mean, if he ever would fall from power, he would be immediately, prosecuted. But I'm sure, he's likely. I don't think they're any threat, as Judi pointed out. He's been methodical in eliminating any threat to his power, including in exile. And I don't think there's any organized opposition movement in Rwanda. So I think Kagame's power is pretty stable right now, and he has the backing of the United States. Judi could weigh in, though. She's more of an expert than me.
Well,
Judi, really quickly, though, I just want to point out the fact is that, me and Gloria, we have our conversations when we often hear people talk about, and you hear these politicians in America saying, oh, my God, racism is done. It's over with and stuff. Well, they haven't gotten outside the United States. We see it in Latin America when they support a lot of these groups that happen to be more of the whiter type of people than the ethnic and the indigenous, those in Latin America. This is a classic. This is like real racism over here. When we talk about imperialism is racism, because they don't give two damns about black people in Africa and, the consequences they face simply for the resources they want to possess.
Well, exactly. I mean, millions of people have died in the war over the last 30 years through the series of Congo wars from 1996. There have been no recently rigorous qualitative and quantitative studies of the number of victims, but the last one that was done in 2007 showed nearly 6 million people had died, of direct violence and war-related diseases. And this is why I say the U.S. regime change in 1996 and 1997 was a crime of aggression, which is the most serious crime under international law. And that regime change became a gateway for all the other crimes that the Congolese have endured under the Kagame never-ending wars and occupations. Legacy of rape, mass rapes, and brutal killings, and the seizure and occupation of farmers' fields, people losing every possibility to make a living, the plunder of those natural resources, particularly the minerals in the eastern provinces and of Kivu. So that Rwanda can export these minerals along the global supply chain. So Kagame has been the biggest criminal agent for the imperialists, in my estimation, on the African continent in modern times. And so the United States has shown no mercy and no care for the victims that have been caused because of its actions and its continued support of Kagame. Now, right now, the United States government under Donald Trump is isolating and marginalizing Kagame for the first time in some respects, because it is very much interested in Tshisekedi and in shifting its alliance maybe towards the Congo directly. What it wants is to lessen China's influence in the mineral sector in Congo, and it wants, the United States wants direct access to Congo's minerals. And so as we speak, Trump and his acolytes and some of his allies in industry are doing deals with the Congolese. And so some of those deals involve getting access to mining concessions. And so we talked about cobalt and copper. We're also talking here about the 3 T's, tantalum, tungsten, and tin. And so those deals are being struck with absolutely no transparency. And Donald Trump, meanwhile, is still bragging that it has brought peace to Congo. So he's saying he stopped Rwanda and he's stopping this ravaging war, but Rwanda is still militarily occupying with its regular army and also its militias, all those key mining areas in North and South Kivu. So it's still controlling those areas. Donald Trump has not managed to get Kagame to withdraw. The violence is still ongoing. The displacement is horrendous. Millions of people have been displaced from their home. Millions are suffering from extreme poverty and malnutrition. So there's this smokescreen going on, and at the same time, multinationals are moving in. So it remains to be seen what the U.S. administration is going to do with Paul Kagame. It may pull a Mobutu and decide to let him go, but I would agree to some extent with Jeremy. Right now, there's no sign, and I think it's because the United States has been so complicit in Rwandan and Ugandan crimes for 30 years, or more than 30 years, since 1986, actually, for 40 years. But it's been so complicit that it cannot just cut ties with Museveni and Kagame. They are still relevant to the security establishment in Washington. If Washington were really serious about punishing Kagame, then they would string him up and bring him to the International Criminal Court at The Hague. If it were really serious, it would launch an arms embargo, declare an arms embargo against Rwanda. It has not done so. So I think it's because the system of getting those minerals, moving them onto the paved roads and the beautiful infrastructure that exists in Rwanda, and then onto the ports, Mombasa or Dar es Salaam, Mombasa in Kenya and Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and then getting those minerals out to the Asian smelters and refiners, and then getting those minerals bought, the refined products, to big tech is too important to disrupt and take someone out like Kagame. So it really remains to be seen.
You want to wrap this up, boys and girls, or do you want
Yeah.
to keep going?
Well, thank you. I think we've gotten a lot of material here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's been fun listening to you and the professor live do this the way you guys been. I'm sorry, Jeremy. I'll let you speak for a second. I just want to say it's been fun. And Judi, it's been fun having you as a guest. Please, Jeremy, go ahead.
No, I just said it's a very informative discussion. Yeah, and thanks again for Judi for enlightening us on this topic. Yeah,
it's so relevant. And, you know, I had on today for my morning show. I do drive time in the morning now. This is the first week we're doing it Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. And today's guest, co-host, I have a different co-host of the week. It was Kyle Anzalone, right? And Kyle Anzalone's a libertarian. We had some interesting conversation, but, you know, talking about our economy and how it's kind of functioned, and, you know, some of the libertarians working within the Republican Party thinking that Donald Trump was acting like a non-interventionist, like he's a different type of guy. But as soon as he got in, it's business as usual. And that's rape and pillage and steal the resources. And let's fight. Let's get ahead of the Chinese now. Chinese come in with a checkbook. We come in with a tank. Thank you so much, Judi, for giving us the story about what's going on. And thank you to the professor and Gloria for the great job you do. Guys, this was
Gilligan's Island.
Why don't you take us away, Gloria, and I'll play the music again for the second time. And thank you all for watching. Remember, these guys will be back next Thursday. And come to Pasta to Go. We have a lot of shows that we are running over here.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night, day, and see you next week.
I don't know why I can't get this outro to run, but I'm just going to run the song. Here we go.
There you go.
You got back, stick to my